elites had sold out, so to speak. So that's an interesting take. Was Canada all over by 1965? I would be interested what people think about that topic. One thing I don't think that George Grant mentioned, he was not a monetary theorist, of course, he was a philosopher, that one of the reasons for the Canadian success immediately after World War II was that Canada did not join the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates. The theory was immediately after World War II, we cannot live next door to the United States and have a fixed exchange rate, just be swamped. And so Canada was not part of the Bretton Woods system until the year 1962, which coincided again with these relatively good years. It proved impossible to have a fixed exchange rate with the US dollar. It was abandoned eventually by 1970, and the Canadian dollar has been floating since then. It's some time since I read the book, so I don't know whether George Grant actually mentioned that. But if I was commenting in the 1960s, or if John Maynard Keynes was commenting in the 1960s, he or I would certainly have made that point. So my last slide is a picture of George Grant, I believe in his study at McMaster University in Hamilton, which university I have the honor to be a PhD graduate of, if that's grammatical. And then my final slide is an even more important Canadian institution, namely the Aurora Philosophy Institute, and our YouTube channel. I've given you the address of our YouTube channel, and that's our website. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. So, Alla, should I stop sharing?
Absolutely, John, and thank you very much. That was very informative and provoking. And if anyone has a comments, please do so. We have a button at the bottom of the screen. Okay, Tori, first one.
Yeah, I'm going to try to put it on. Don't mind me. Go ahead, Tori. Right, but
okay. Well, I just want to push back a little bit on, first of all, the idea of 250 years. That I would have liked to see more empirical data or some kind of theory behind why 250. But I would point out before that even that, the Roman Empire lasted much longer than 500 years. So there's two 250 cycles right there. And if you look at other empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire, some of the Chinese empires, and possibly even some of the American empires like the Aztec and the Mayan and the Incan and so forth, which are not monetary per se, although they had kind of a money equivalent in the Incan Empire. None of those corresponded to 250-year cycles. And there's also other more recent historians besides Glubb, who've done a lot more empirical work on cycles and the collapse of empires. For example, Kondratiev was one who was more tuned into economic cycles. But Jared Diamond and Joseph Tainter are some of the others more contemporary anthropologists and historians who've looked at the collapse of empires and the different lengths of empire. So Glubb, I would say, is an old-fashioned British Empire, 19th century kind of guy, if I had to say. And then the other thing about the currency situation, and I'm not defending the United States dollar, but the prospect for an alternative reserve currency in the in the world still very unlikely, even in the face of such a corrupt and venal government as we in the United States. I'm an American USA citizen that we have today. And you might look at it as the US dollar is sort of the worst. I mean, it's how did they say? It's the best option. It's not a very good option, but it's better than all the rest. Um, and one of the litmus tests that will uh, that you can use to determine whether or not people are going to switch off the dollar as a reserve currency and go to some of the, say, a BRICS reserve currency is, where do the economic elites in those various countries ultimately want to put their money? And it's usually the US dollar. They would not even put it in their own currencies. They would rather put it in dollar. For example, Russia has been for decades now moving the elites are moving their money into London and into the USA. So I until the elites really start showing trust in their own currencies, I think the dollar still will remain supreme. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tori. I was it's difficult for me to like follow everything that you were saying. You and I have had this debate before. You think that everyone I agree with is old-fashioned, whereas I actually think maybe they're old-fashioned, but they're coming into fashion again. We had that debate over philosophy. Um, uh, Again, to push back you on a little bit there, but I do want to deal with the substantive issues you raise, which I think are very interesting. I myself have been trying to think about this length of empire. We'll deal with the length of empire first, if I may. And yeah, I think what it's intended to be is like the effective power of the empire, right? You could call you, like I'm very worried about the destruction of England, right? And you could say there's still a country called England, right? And that's existed since 450, right? But almost all of the time, the English have not been uh, uh, powerful, or it's not been a powerful regime. Um, so I do think, the Roman Empire. I don't think there was two cycles. No. I think it was effectively over by sometime in the mid fourth century. So right. I mean, they let in the barbarians on what 375 or something. Rome was sacked in 410. I mentioned that.
Well, the Republic of Rome started before Christ by about 150 years.
Yes, but
And then the empire started with Caesar right at time of Christ, and it didn't collapse until into the 500s. And actually, if you wanted, the Byzantine Empire broke off and continued for another 250, 300 years. So if you counted the Byzantine, which was originally part of the Roman Empire, you're looking at three 250-year cycles.
Yes, but that's
just a historical fact.
That's my point. That's different regimes. That's the point. That obviously the Republic was different. A different regime had to be founded by Augustine. I think the empire itself began AD 14. We pointed out that Rome itself was sacked in 410, but the effective power of Rome was gone by late fourth century. The last Roman empire, in theory, was in 576, but that's kind of like King Charles today. Like King Charles has zero power. That's the kind of point I would make. But I think you're quite right that's the reason why I wouldn't want to put a particularly psychological or sociological spin on it, because it doesn't allow for these different lengths. And in some ways, it's just serendipity that the British Empire fits in kind of with my financial thesis. I do think it fits in very well because like in 1694, you had a thing called England, which was kind of nowhere, as has often been the case in our history, of no power and nothing. Uh, had a century of civil war and destruction, right? And within 20 years, it was a major power, and you can in our present times, there's been extremely rapid rise of China, for example, to the status of a world power. And I would argue precisely because of the financial reforms that occurred in the 90s. But you see my point, and I do agree here that that's a point. The next thing I would uh, uh, want to mention is that, interestingly enough, some of those ancient, we used to think that things like Rome, for example, didn't have money and credit. But once again, more recent research suggests that they do. Anywhere in Europe, you can dig up a bunch of coins from the ground and find Roman coins. And then, therefore, historians said, oh, coins and that must have been important. But of course, the opposite was true. As the legions were returning to Rome, the system had broken down entirely, and the reason they dumped the coins is just useless weight. That's why it would be fascinating though to go into more detail. I do think that you underestimate, probably from the vantage point of the being in the USA and with the USA being the hegemon for so long, that the US dollar will always survive. It's not true that Russians or Chinese, want to hold. They've been literally banned from holding the US dollar, and the US dollar holdings that they have been confiscated. Let's not talk about the rights and wrongs of that, but it's natural that these other countries would try to, and I'm going to ask, with respect to Vlad, I'm going to ask John, Juan, Matthias to weigh in on this. Like before your own question, if you see if you don't mind, Matthias. The system that many of us advocate is not to have a new reserve currency, not to have a system with no reserve currency at all. I think that's the point. So yeah, these were great comments, though, Torrey. You know what I mean? You really have the ability to stir the pot, shall I say? Yeah. So, Matthias, would you just like to respond to that specific issue about the BRICS and the new system that's coming forward?
Yeah. Many thoughts. Very, very interesting, John. First of all, thank you for that mention. Really, you helped me to conciliate those ideas between sovereign currency and reserve or non-reserve currency. This typology of at least three types, which you have a sovereign reserve currency that eventually you can think in the US dollars. Also a sovereign non-reserve currency, which is most of the currency. And in our case in Argentina, could be the non-sovereign, non-reserve currency, or to not be so strict, some limit sovereignty, right? Because there are countries like Argentina have a lot of public debt in foreign currency. I mean, many restrictions you don't have in a normal sovereign non-reserve currency. So you really helped me to clarify better this point. So this is why I was so interested in our exchange. But I had some question or some thought about what is exactly the connection between war and money. Because in principle, the first insight that came out to me is that, okay, the state, if you think in the state, the concept of the national state is basically based on two pillars, which is the monopoly of violence and the monopoly of the unit of account. If you don't have one of those two, I don't think that you have a state in a modern terms.
Yeah.
yeah, and if you extend that at the international level, well, is the order that imposed the winner, in the case of the national level, is in the case of a civil war, for example, well, the winner is the state, right? Is you have a civil war, now there is an order. At the international level, I don't think that is so different. The story is who wins the war in some way have the space to impose the unit of account.
Yeah.
This is true, is something different at the national level, probably that you don't have to pay taxes in that unit of account. So it's a little bit different, but in some way is the same, which is the result of a war.
Yeah.
So my two question or thought is basically, yeah, maybe we can think in what would be the best international monetary system, but I'm skeptical about if the hegemon will not want to impose his own currency. This is the first.
Yeah. So,
and the second part,
sorry,
related.
Sorry, that was essentially agreeing with Tori then on that point, right?
Yeah. And my last question, and I stop, is why England, after defeating Napoleon, come back to the gold standard, because that was the moment to impose the unit of account as a fiat currency.
That's
but
a brilliant
for
insight.
some reason,
Yeah.
so well, basically is my first thought about your exposition.
Yeah, no. So Vlad, I'm sorry to do that. I thought it was relevant to bring Mateus in, just in response to Tori. So sorry that I sort of preempted you, but can you go ahead now, Vlad, please?
Vlad. Oh,
Sorry, but John asked you a question, and I want you to answer the question, and then I'll ask my question. Yeah, he was the first.
Okay. Yeah.
No worries at all. I can wait because there was an interesting question.
The reason I said that was that Tori raised a bunch of interesting points, and I thought Mateus is literally a central banker. I thought he was the guy to answer that. Let me just take up the third question, right? Which is that, and it's something that's a mystery to me too. And the older I get, I think that, in a sense, like it's Keynes said, ideas, not vested interests, are dangerous for good or ill. The way that I think about it is that if you see something which works, now, it's debatable if building empires and everything is a good thing, but from the point of view of the national interest of the country, if you see something which works, namely have a pure credit system, and as you so rightly remark, that's the key. You don't think that money is gold. You have to impose your own unit of account, and then you're in perfect control of it. That would have been the way for Britain to go to preserve and perpetuate its power. But you had these fantastic ideological debates. People like David Ricardo, who, the very famous economist, a so-called classical economist, he and others were part of the so-called the currency school, which wanted to restrict the supply of money, tie it down to gold. They were like the monetarists of that time. And then there was the banking school, which were, roughly speaking, espousing a view similar to what I've been espousing here today, that you need to have a pure credit economy. I like the way that you put it, to impose your units of accounts. And those guys won politically. The currency school won politically, just like in the United States, for a while, the monetarist school won politically. And by the way, caused great problems domestically for the United States. But yeah, almost it's almost in a sense that they can't manage their success, if you want to put it that way. I don't know whether that's a very good, but it's something which puzzles me. Like, why throw it all away, sort of thing, if you want to put it that way.
Can I just interject a quick point that
Sure.
the U.S. in 1971 went off the gold standard. So
yeah.
It's been a credit economy, and it's just the U.S. dollar has just by de facto become the reserve currency. It's not even, in fact, the U.S. never really wanted to be the reserve currency, but it's sort of like the strongest economy, and then with U.S. companies investing all over the world, and then there became offshore dollar markets like in Europe. It just sort of became the reserve and the de facto unit of account for your world trade. So in fact, you have what you want already.
Yeah. That's I mean, Hicks said about that Nixon tried. He said that Nixon cutting the link between the dollar and gold. The U.S. dollar tried to abdicate, to move away from its throne. But Hicks' phrase was, the abdication was not accepted.
Yeah.
And right now they're trying to abdicate with the sanctions and,
tariffs.
Yeah, the Ukraine war. I believe this, I guess the bottom line is, I believe this time the abdication will be accepted and we'll move to something like a BRICS. But time will tell. Okay, Vlad, go ahead, please. Sorry that you've been so long delayed.
It's okay, no worries at all. Professor Smithin, thank you very much, first of all, for such an exciting lecture. I found many new things for myself. And by the way, my grandfather was a gold digger in the Klondike in 1899.
Here we go.
Yeah, that's a real story. But my question is related to current situation. Do you think that Russian-Ukrainian war is a start of Russian empire fall? Thank you very much, Professor Smithin.
And Allah probably is better better positioned to answer this to me. What I personally think is that the Putin regime is Russian nationalism, i.e., it's not the Tsarist Empire, right? It's not the Soviet Union. Obviously, they're not communists, right? And so, in a sense, Putin is doing what I've always advocated: economic nationalism. And the question is, how does that sort of correspond, if you will, to ethno-nationalism, right? And I think that that's exactly what's going on in Russia now. They definitely have the economic basis. The currency actually is very strong. And that's what I think is happening. Again, I don't want to go sort of too deeply into politics, but and I will ask Allah actually to comment. But I think what the Putin regime is Russian nationalism, both in the economic sense and the ethno sense, if you will. And the economic piece of the puzzle is going to have to be something like a relationship with the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China and India, absolutely. And that regime would make a huge mistake if it tries to decide on it. If you pick the Russian ruble as a reserve currency, or if you picked the Chinese RMB as a reserve currency, you'd be making the same mistake that we in the West have made, the last, since World War II, having a reserve currency. I do advocate a system of, what was the expression, Matthias, I've forgotten the term, sovereign non-reserve
currency
with floating exchange rates. Ala, before the other guys come in, and again, my apologies. What I'm trying to do is allow the conversation to flow in the directions it wants to go. Would you like to comment on this current Russian situation?
Not much. I'm just a little bit more skeptical than you are, and I don't think that Russia is thriving in any way.
Yeah,
It maybe not fallen per se. I wouldn't like go to another extreme. I think they surviving. That's probably how would I say, like at all means,
yeah,
kind of do the best they can. Like not the best, but like do whatever it costs. And I think they have a lot of a lack of. They do have nationalism, but they do have a lot of lack of ideology that people would buy into compared to the West. So there are, I don't know, like I think they have more faults than benefits at the moment, though they might, I hope they have more potential and go somewhere like in a more positive state and better place
yeah.
because they have potential again for many kind of aspects. So I hope they will go somewhere and be better in including the international kind of acceptance at least
Yeah.
because people are so negative, people even scared to say they're Russians at this like in the moment. It's kind of I think it's a little bit overreaction. So it's not black and white kind of. Oh, like definitely it's a huge country with like many problems, and I don't know. They, I hope for the best, of course.
One huge mistake, which is relevant to what we're talking about, they have been making one theory that they took over from the West is tight money. The governor of the central bank in Russia is crazy about raising interest rates and reducing inflation. Like real interest rates in Russia, Matthias would know the best figures, but they're like 8%, 9%. That's crazy. So it's a miracle that the Russian economy grows at all. You know, and the fact that it is still growing, and the fact that they're arguably winning a war, and so forth, in spite of orthodox banking policy, uh, seems to me to speak volumes. You know, thanks, Ala. So, Frank, again, I'm sorry that we've gone on. We're now going back to the USA, right? We're giving.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Smithin. Thank you.
Thank
You
you a
know,
lot.
we're giving like equal time or something, shall we say?
Well, thank you so much. This is my first time with this group, and I'm really impressed with
Right.
the
Mhm.
very impressed with the expertise here. It's not my expertise, economics. I come more from an evolutionary psychology
Oh,
background. So, John, I'm glad you're sitting down because I don't think you have a great deal of respect for the sociological perspective on things. But
oh,
I do want to put in a plug for a different perspective on this, and very much stimulated by your reference to that Glub article. I read the first article, 26 pages. I couldn't put it down. It was fascinating. I, I really enjoyed it. It stimulated so many things that were kind of rhyming with my view of cultural evolution. Evolutionary psychology is kind of the underpinning for the for the evolution of cultures, which is based on the same strategy that biology used for evolution. Faithful reproduction of systems, some variation, a variety of selection pressures, such that some variations are more successful than others. It's a simple plan without a planner. you know um, so it's very well documented from a biology perspective, and there are quite a few folks who are making great strides extending this into culture. to help explain why we're evolving so rapidly. You know, considering how slow biological evolution is, how long it takes, how is it that we have innovated in incredible extents in a short period of time? And that's where, you know, culture group evolution kind of comes along, because it follows a lot of that same model, you know,
Yeah.
a very systematic reproduction from one generation to the next with some variation, so that, you know, as different selection pressures come up in the environment, some culture groups are going to fare better than others, you know. So, you know, in contrast to, you know, I appreciate what Tori was saying about the 250 years seems like almost, you know, like you kind of have to stretch to think about it exactly 250 years. But I wouldn't focus so much on the exact number as just the fact that empires, great societies that seemed like they were going to last forever followed an arc. You know, that they rose to power, there certain things happened and they diminished and they were replaced by another group. Whether it's 250 years, whether some were other longer, some are shorter, you know, that was kind of like an interesting novelty in the Globe article. But I think the real thought of it was that cultures that seem like they're going to last forever seem to have a peak and then they diminish, you know, and then another culture comes along. And it seems to be, you know, based on some of the very real principles that we deal with in both biological evolution and culture group evolution, which are the dynamics of competition and cooperation, you know. So when you talk about monetary policy, or when we talk about global reserve currencies, you know, in my mind, I really have no capacity to think of money or currency of having agency, right? That's purely a vehicle for communication. That's purely a vehicle for people who have an idea that they use this as a unit of communication to create create cooperation. For what purpose? For altruism? No. To create a sense of cooperation to outcompete another group. Okay. So if you think of, you know, the various cultures that you know, Glub talked about and that you've talked about, you know, there's an established group. They end up having stuff, you know. Sometimes they monetize it in terms of tokens or whatever, but they have stuff. There are other groups that are held down and, you know, denied getting stuff. Those other groups form coalitions, cooperate in order to what? To commiserate with each other? No, they cooperate to build up strength to outcompete the reigning regime, right? So, you know, we get to, you know, talking about the BRICS versus the U.S. You know, the U.S. You know, I think you're talking about the current reserve currency being the U.S. You know, it's easier for U.S. businesses to do. You know, it has been for a long time. It's easier for U.S. businesses to do global transactions if you're using the same money. You know, I personally don't think that that's going to, you know, be necessary for very long. You know, as computing power gets to be what it is, you know, translations from one currency to another is a trivial activity already. You know, it's just going to become more and more global. So, as somebody mentioned, the need for a global reserve currency will go away because it won't, because, you know, we're going to be already taking friction out of the system through compute power, right? So the idea of the U.S. maintaining this global reserve currency to make it easier to, have frictionless transactions across the globe, being replaced by some other cooperative agreement by the BRICS is an interesting dynamic, because you would think that the United States would have such a vested interest in maintaining this global cooperation to use a single currency because it makes it so much easier, right? And it would, we can outcompete these other countries by using, one of Donald Trump's, very successful strategies, which is to divide and conquer, right? So maintaining our hegemony by dividing and conquering other groups is a success strategy in most societies, right? But then you go ahead and take a look at what happens when you get somebody who's got a lot of stuff and wants to keep it away from other people. Are other societies just sitting back and forever going to say, okay, you're going to do it? The notion of cooperative communities is a success strategy to overcome the divide and conquer strategy. So, I mean, the BRICS, they must be thanking Donald Trump for this great gift that he's giving them, right? He's essentially dividing the Western countries when, because that in his mind is a success strategy for me to maintain my dominance.
Yeah.
But throughout history, we've seen that the best success strategy for toppling the regime that's in power is through an alliance, through cooperation by other groups that eventually outcompete the previous dominant strategy. So to Tory, the notion that 250 years, I don't think that's the key dynamic. The key dynamic is that countries increase in power, stabilize for some reason or other, rest on their laurels, whatever, and then get outcompeted by the next set of groups that can outcompete the current dynamic leader through competition. So, we're giving the BRICS this great gift, right? We're going to divide the West so that make it easier for them to cooperate and outcompete us. I don't know that that's going to be the case because I think there's a new player out on the chessboard that I think is going to outcompete both the BRICS and the United States. But so I approach it from that evolutionary psychology perspective, from the cultural evolution of how competition and cooperation, how evolution psychology starts with me and my drives and how I relate to us, my group, and how we relate to them. My group, how my group relates to the other group, right? Whether the method of communication is dollars, whether the method of communication is bitcoins, whatever the method of communication, whether it's hides and skins, right? It's a method of establishing cooperation in order to outcompete, in order to get more stuff. So I'm really wanting to, I take what you're saying and translating into my own mind, and I'd like to hear more about the various philosophies that you folks have talked about. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, and thanks very much. And I'm having the same problem because now I'm trying to translate what you've just said, into my mindset, and I'm sure everyone else would. And sometimes I think that when Terry and I dispute about things, there's much of that same dynamic going on. We're not quite using the words in this, you know what I mean, in the same way. But
I hope you believe that that's a worthwhile exercise.
Oh,
I think when we translate into different ways of thinking about things, There's this famous paper in physics. Juan Maldaceno wrote this paper in physics. That's one of the most cited papers in physics since Albert Einstein, called ADS-CFT. You know that he anti-de Sitter space and conformal field theory.
Yeah.
He wrote a paper that translated these two things together. Why is that important? Because anti-de Sitter space is the fundamentals of relational of general relativity.
Yeah.
Conformal field theory is the underpinning for quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
He wrote a paper to translate the two of them.
Yeah.
So that sometimes you can better explain a phenomenon that we see in the real world from one perspective, and sometimes you can describe it better from another perspective. But I truly believe that doing that exercise, we can all get a better appreciation of how the world actually works.
And I know that paper, by the way, but I just want to try and do it a little bit, to you. First of all, I hope I didn't give the impression that I was disparaging whatever disciplines I mentioned. My point was, I think, is the same as your point, that it can't explain the 250 years. That was.
But it does help to add color to why that changes.
Yeah, no, I agree. But let's just stick with that, right? And we're not asserting that money has agency, or we're not neoclassical economists in that way. Other people will be aware of that debate. Jeff Ingham, my friend Jeff Ingham from Cambridge University, is in fact a sociologist, and his argument is precisely that money is a social relation. That's exactly what it is. It's not notes. It's precisely a social relation. So those are, maybe the way I talk, it's difficult to translate, but I take your point. But it made me pick up on those three issues. I'm fascinated when you bring in the evolution, and let's put. I think we all agree that 250 years is just an accident in a particular case, right? It could be five, whatever, right? But what amazes me is I don't see how evolution can explain things over a time period of 1,000 years, 200 years. Like evolution takes a very long time.
Well, this is where biological evolutionists have had that same problem, right?
Yeah.
So I think biological evolutionists have come to the notion that over biological time, which is millions of years,
yes,
certain species that turned into Homo sapiens developed certain biological precursors, certain biological tools that allowed social learning to take over. This is the bridge, that in the last couple of 100,000 years, biology developed certain biological tools. There's an Oxford evolutionary psychologist who talks about cognitive gadgets.
Yes.
She talks about biology developed certain things like the propensity for language, like the propensity for theory of mind, and then those are kind of the underpinnings for social learning.
Yeah, right.
There's this guy, Michael Tomasello, who is a comparative developmental anthropologist. He's got this lab in Germany where he takes young infants, under 18 months, and provides them with nonverbal tests and compares them to primates. In order to answer that question about how is it that we, skyrocketed in our innovation when a 10-month, 12-month, even up to an 18-month infant is psychologically indistinguishable from primates at that level.
Yeah, but here's the point, Frank, and this is the point I want to try to make. Let's say that mind or ability is the ultimate process of evolution, right? So we have a mind and we've got these gadgets, we can work things out. I think the question that myself and Jeff Ingham, what we're saying is then, well, how well do you use these gadgets? Just to put it back to economics, is if your theory, is that you believe in the so-called currency school, if all your mind does is think about tight money and balanced budgets and sound finance, you're not using your developmental tool well. If you were to accept the other view, maybe you'll accept that, shall we say, I'm just speaking off the top of my head here, accept the banking school, and then you will work for 150 years, 250 years. But then after 150 years or so, some other guy comes up with a theory or reverts to the old theory, and all that you've learned, forget. So the point is, yes, we have the tools, we have our mind. Going back to the point that somebody else was making, why do they make?
Why is that a question? I mean, there is no teleology here.
Yeah.
There's people have ideas. There's culture has some consistency. You pass knowledge on from one generation to the next.
Yeah, yes.
And then the culture that you have has some differences with the next culture.
Yeah.
The world changes.
Yeah, yes, but it's a question of why it works for 200 or 300 years or whatever, and then somehow fails. But anyway.
Well, we're in the middle of this huge experiment, right?
Yeah.
So you would think that the leader of the United States would just intuitively capitalize on this notion of being the big dog in a big cooperative venture to just dominate the world. And he's hell-bent on going it alone, which is not a success strategy.
I'm not. I don't think the particular political figures or the particular.
No, we're in the middle of this experiment to answer your question, I think.
I don't. Yeah. The way I see it, British Empire is dead, the American Empire is dying, and something new is emerging in the East. That's the simple way I see it. Whether that's true or not, the question.
I don't think it's in the East. I think there's a bigger problem, but that's but we're on the same track. Yeah.
So we'll go on to Samuel, who will push back with a totally different view.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah.
The new empire is going to be in Canada. So,
sorry.
The new empire is going to be Canada.
Yeah.
It's going to be the true north. Okay, so I have two questions. First of all, so you were talking about how like a lot of these currencies went back and forth from gold standard to coming off of the gold standard. And the way I see it, the reason why they would want to go back onto the gold standard, time and time again, is because there's some sort of social pressure to, reduce the effects of inflation, right? They want to, harden their currency and kind of prove that, people are not losing the value of their money over time. And there's a social pressure for this. So I don't see that social pressure has gone away now that we've gone off of the gold standard. In fact, I feel like that's the reason why we raise interest rates in order to, in an alternative way without the gold standard, to try to like basically just kind of simulate what the gold standard would do. So in an era where we don't have a gold standard, what would your prescription be in order to kind of not just try to hack in another gold standard by raising interest rates? Because that's what we're doing at the moment all the time with the business cycle. That's my first question.
Yes, first question. Do you want to do the second, or do you want me to?
Second one would be, I think,
to do that question now, kind of thing.
Yeah, I want you to like answer both questions like fresh in your mind.
Oh yeah, okay, no, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Well, as you were talking, what I noted, if you noticed that I lumped all those things together, you know, the gold standard, balanced budget, high interest rates, all of
Yeah.
those things are exactly as you say, attempts to reduce inflation.
Yes.
Um, the short answer to your question, of course, is that the theories of inflation that they possess are wrong too. For example, people believe that raising taxes will increase inflation, whereas the opposite is true. Like if you have higher taxes, that increases prices, that kind of thing. So we would need to delve into the realms of economic theory and monetary theory.
Do you
The
think that people feeling some sort of pain in their wallets is an illusion, or do you think that there's some realness to that?
Oh no, they're feeling pain in their wallets. What I've always advocated for is rising real wages, like my, the real wage is the wage rate divided by the price level, right? So for working people, what's required is rising real wages, which has not been in the case in the United States, for example, for 40 years or so, right? And to be fair to, I really hate discussing the president of your country, because if we start down that, I'm talking to the Americans here, because if we start down that road, it just goes on and on forever. And my friend John Menez might even weigh in. He's sitting there waiting to pounce. So I'd like to take it away from contemporary, political ideas. But if we can arrange a system whereby real wages are rising and there's full employment, right, which means that money wages rise faster than real wages, then everyone will be happy. The reason that people are feeling pain right now is that the opposite is true.
So you would need a system that removes all barriers to entry for entrepreneurship and business creation so that labor is in high demand and there's a
Yeah.
lot of employment, I guess.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, if you think of the three classes, right, the financial sector, on the one hand, I call them rentiers, Keynes called them rentiers, workers on the other, right, and uh, entrepreneurs on the other. Roughly speaking, like what we're sort of aiming for, you can't do away with profits and entrepreneurs altogether, because if there was no entrepreneurs, there'd be no employment, nothing would be happening. You can certainly reduce the reward to finance, both in terms of reducing financial speculation and also in not in having low interest rates per se, but in having low real rates of interest. That is to say, the nominal interest rate, the interest rates that's quoted in the marketplace, should perhaps be positive, but not very much higher than the inflation rate. So
Okay.
existing financial capital is being preserved, right? And so you're not robbing anyone, you're not dispossessing anyone. Yeah, real wages would be right if you put all the policies in place. Low taxes is important. Some people that are financially conservative won't agree, but some government spending is important. Think of the defense industries. We're talking about war, so there's always going to be some kind of a social conflict between profit and wages. That there has to be some profit, otherwise there's no incentive for anything. And at the ultimate desiderata is high real wages. I've got a number of policy prescriptions. I do not balance the budget. Have taxes low and do whatever government spending is necessary. But the main point is the so-called Smithin rule, which is if you take the not called by me, called by other people, right? Like I didn't name it
I
myself.
actually looked it up before this talk, so I saw other people talking about the Smithin rule online, and I was very very pleased.
Yeah, exactly. And all that is the policy rate of the central bank, should in fact be exactly equal to the inflation rate. So the inflation rate goes up, you raise the policy rate of the central bank, so that the real interest rate is zero. If you translate that into the rest of the financial system, yeah, the real interest rates will be somewhat positive, but not overly positive. So the value of financial capital is preserved. If that rule is maintained, there's not going to be no financial speculation, because financial speculation is all about changes in interest rates. There's an inverse relationship between asset prices and interest rates, as you very well know and have expertly demonstrated. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. There's a whole series of other policy things which need to be done. People always tell me, "Oh, you think that's a panacea?" No, it's not a panacea, but it's a start.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second part would be you talked at the beginning of the presentation about the nature of money being essentially social something. What was it?
Social relation of indebtedness. That's what it is.
Okay. Right. Social relation in indebtedness. So basically, it is a way to measure debt.
Yes.
That's what money is.
And it's
Okay.
also you deciding what you pay your debt in. Right.
Okay.
So the Bank of England was doing. Do you pay your debt in gold, or do you pay it back in Bank of England notes? As Matthias was saying, if you pay it back in Bank of England notes, the Bank of England has all the power.
Okay.
That's essentially what it boils down to. This is MMT. You've heard of MMT, modern monetary theory.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
My question then would be, if that's all that money is,
Yeah.
just a way of paying back debts.
Yes.
And it's nothing else. It's not a medium of exchange or anything else like that. It is a social relation first. Then how can we say how would I put this? If you want to pay back your debt, let's say you borrow some item. Let's say you borrow a hammer.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the correct way to pay that debt back be to return the hammer or to return an equally good object that's the exact same kind? Why do we need to invent this token essentially in order to pay back? Because how do you value it in the notes of that token if it's not a unit of count, if it's not a medium of exchange, if it's just a social relation?
Well, of course, that social relation, there's a whole theory behind it. That social relation becomes a medium of exchange. What happens is, if you go back historically, this first happened in the temples in Mesopotamia, 4000 BC. The state decrees the unit of account, what it is, right? So that gives them power. That's the way the accounts are kept.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And naturally, once you have a unit of account, you start making credits and debts. And what money is a combination. It's the asset in which combines the unit of account, and I'm just trying to think of the unit of account and the means of payment. They're combined in the same thing. Where by means of payment we mean payments of debt. And of course, if you're just thinking about normal transactions, this is one of the things that Hicks said. In fact, the normal transaction is not just me and you trading, not just buying a cup of coffee now, right? The normal transaction is split up into pay in advance and deliver later, right? Or the other way around, don't pay until 2027 or something like that. Both things require the medium exchange to solidify what the debt is. And ultimately, though it's a transaction, really every transaction involves this creation and extinguishing of debts. For capitalism to function, I think you'd agree with me that capitalism, the main thing in capitalism is making profit.
Depends on your definitions
Well,
of capitalism and profit.
Yes, but let's take that for granted. What is profit, even in today's age? Profit is a sum of money. It's the bottom line in the income statement as opposed to the balance sheet, right? And if there is no money, how can you make profit? And we've already proved that if there is to be more money, you have to have credit creation. That's exactly the way the system works. Now, obviously we're going into like complicated economic theory, which would take us, but you've actually hit the nail on the head with, if you like, the key points that need to be articulated to establish that. Anyway, thanks, Samuel.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll move on to Claude.
John, I just want to make a little announcement. We don't take more questions in this session. And the people who wants to ask questions, please go to YouTube channel. We're going to post it next week or so. And put in writing, and John promised to answer it. Yes, John?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So basically we've got Claude,
Tori, I hope he's not the first time, so not too long. And please, and Rick. And we don't take more questions, but anyone who has questions, please go to YouTube channel.
Yes, and should we just let Rick and Tori and whoever was first, Claude?
Claude. No, Claude.
Yeah.
Claude, the next one, yes.
Claude, or owner as he's called, we'll let him speak next.
It's very confusing, or maybe that's the right
thing. I owe you all.
Yeah, and then let
that's a very financial statement, by the way. Yeah, very appropriate.
All three say your piece. And I would just like to thank...
And the rest questions, go to YouTube channel question session. It's great communication tool, so...
Yes, thanks.
Please, welcome.
Go ahead, Claude.
Have you read the Rise and Fall of Great Empires or Great Powers by Paul Kennedy? And I always find it fascinating, the idea of saying that a great power comes into being and is always forced to compete with others in terms of their relative strength, depending on the resources they have, their ability to access new technologies, and also the ever-increasing cost of defending what they've managed to get. And of course, in the book, he goes through the Habsburgs, and then the English and the French challenging the Spanish Habsburgs and taking over. Then the British being able to overcome Napoleon and becoming the hegemon of the 19th century. But as all this was developing, other powers were slowly building up speed, in particular the United States. And we seem to be in a situation now where America is in that position where they become a net debtor nation, and they are compared to other powers around the world. They are no longer the only game in town. When you have China building up and India becoming stronger economies, these economies fluctuate up and down. So you have that situation, I believe, that money is part of that. The fact that the American dollar is still basically the currency of the world, it may remain that way for quite a long time in the future. But as China becomes more and more powerful, it's going to start to have that challenge being done to it.
Yeah.
So we go on to, thanks, Claude. We'll go on to Tori.
Mm-hmm. Oh, one last little thing. You mentioned George Grant.
Yeah, George, did you know?
Yeah, well, I remember studying him in university, and if I remember correctly, what I learned way back when, it had to do with the fact that he was bemoaning the loss of traditional conservatism. Mm-hmm. Like he basically said that, like today, when you look at the modern Conservative Party in Canada, the modern Republican Party in America, they're not conservative parties, they're neoliberal.
Precisely.
And so the idea of conservatism as a political theory that was developed throughout the 19th century no longer exists in the vast majority of the parties, and it's just different forms of liberalism, either libertarian liberalism, or more those that are more hands-on, such as the people who want to do the nanny state.
Yeah, Claude, I agree with actually both of the points that you made.
Mm-hmm.
The Paul Kennedy point and the George Grant point. Yeah. So thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. I just try to be quick here, that I wanted to connect with something Frank said, and with the idea of money as a social relation, and then this overall idea of debt. One of the easy ways to think about money, what it is basically how it's created by banks, and also this ties in with the whole gold standard issue, and your comments, John, about interest rates, and other, this whole budgetary mindset of don't have deficits and balance your budget and so on and so forth. But the creation, it's money is not just debt to pay off debt. I'm sorry, it's not just a debt. It's using money, which all money that's created is debt, and then you're using the debt money to pay off other debts. So you got to sort of separate out all the different relationships between borrowers and lenders, buyers and sellers, employers and employees. Those are the social relationships. And then in the case of, say, giving your money to somebody, in a charity or in a airing it to your offspring or something, you're just transferring it. These are the kinds of relationships that generally encapsulate the world of money, or I should say, the world of money creates these social relationships. But when you look at how it's created, the easy way to think about it is, getting a mortgage to buy a house from somebody, or just even using your credit card to buy something at a restaurant or something. There's several debts that are instantly created when the money transaction is settled with money. Because if you're using your credit card, you already have this relationship with your bank who issues the credit card. You're going to owe that bank money, but so on your balance sheets, you're getting money as an asset to spend, but you have equally a quantity of debt on your liability side. So you're in debt, but the bank that issues you the credit card, they get on their asset side this credit card bill that they expect you to pay. That's on their asset side, but they have the liability of the amount of the transaction to owe the merchant who you just used the credit card with. So the bank goes into debt, but is balanced by the asset of your promissory note. You go into debt. The promissory note is your debt, but you now have purchasing power to buy something with. And then, that's settling the debt you're making with the merchant, who is expecting to get this debt money, this instantly created, into their asset ledger, and then they're also looking to cash that debt money into your bank or the banking network, because they'll usually have a different bank than your bank. So they put it into their bank. They deposit the money that you spent to them using your credit card, and now your bank goes to ask the buyer's bank to pay cash to it. So there's a lot of debts that are going around. And one of the reasons that they used the gold standard was because money can just be created out of nothing. You notice, by the way, that the money supply is increased using credit cards or using mortgages or whatever, commercial loans or whatever. but the net worth of all the players stays the same because the assets and the liabilities balance out. So anyway, because it's just created out of nothing, money is just created by a banking network agreeing to recognize each other's transfers when, one person's bank goes to the other bank and says, somebody from your bank wrote me a check that says, you got gold on account. I want that gold. But that's why initially we had this gold standard. It was sort of a limiting thing so that banks can just go hog wild and create all this money out of nothing. So the gold standard acted as kind of this brake on the whole system, but it was really inefficient because they were literally shipping gold back and forth between central banks of all these sovereign nations, and it just wasn't very efficient. I mean, it was going to collapse anyway. So what they did is they just, like John has been saying, it all went to a credit system. Everything's kind of floating. And then it all kind of depends on sort of the macro or national trade, aggregate trade of a sovereign state with other sovereign states, and whether it was, in balance or out of balance in one direction or another. So you use this, you use this floating system, and usually it sort of got very heavily dependent on, whether the national government was overspending or not overspending, and being in balance, not deficit spending. So that's kind of the issue there. But let's see, the relation. Oh, the point that I wanted to get back onto with Frank was that Frank said, and by the way, Frank, I like your evolutionary theory, and I totally agree with what it is, with the important sort of extra point, and you kind of alluded to it, but there's evolution, which is sort of a biological thing. But once you got language going, and once you have these more advanced institutions, including the institution of money, then it's sort of, as this guy Robert Wright says in this book that's very good, by the way, Non-Zero, that there's human culture gets on an escalator, and now you can talk, and you have this it's like goes to another level. It's like emergence happens, and there's a lot more capacity and productivity capable. Number one, with language, but number two, with money, credit money. And the point that I want to make and sort of push back on Frank is that it's not just money is not just a unit of account or a measurement of someone's indebtedness to somebody else. There's agency in money. It's not just communication, it's agency. The reason why you use a credit card or borrow money in any form, a mortgage, say, is you want that other person to give you something. So it's all based on agency. Things happen. Money makes things happen. American economist Francis Walker said, money is what money does. And it's really true. And a later philosopher of language, John Austin, in Oxford, England, says, you do things with words, you do things with speaking. There's agency in speaking. You make requests, you make promises. It's not just declarations or assertions, but you command people to do things, and money is sort of a form of commanding.
Thanks, Terry. That's why John Searle, by the way, the philosopher John Searle.
Well, John Searle was a student. John Austin.
You were a student. Anyway, yeah. You did a good exposition of both of those 2 points.
Yeah.
So that's all.
We'll move on to Rick, which is the last. You have the last word, as actually usually, don't you?
Well, actually, one thing I would like to try and point out here, this 250 years for an empire to collapse, and that bothered me. And I says, why would that happen? Yeah. And the only thing I can think of is that's how long it takes for a book to go out of fashion or to get lost or go out of print. When knowledge disappears, the empire disappears.
Yeah, I was trying to make that point actually, perhaps not as well as you've just done earlier. I think that's exactly right. The evolution, the evolution, gives you the brain power and the intelligence, but you have to use it.
Yes, and you have to have that background. Once it's gone, if a library of Alexandria burns down or the Mongols come and sack Baghdad and burn all the libraries, that knowledge is gone. And it can take, centuries to bring it back again. And there's your looking at your collapse. People even books get old, people forget about them. The kids don't want to read the old crap anymore, and it's gone, and that's it. Oh, and Frank, your talk, I thought that was fabulous, by the way. Thank you. Okay, that's enough for me. Thank you, John. It was a great talk, by the way. I loved it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think it was good that we let these conversations go on, right? Because I think a bunch of stuff, at least from my point of view, a bunch of stuff is I've learned a lot certainly from what's been said today. Alice, so do you want to wrap it up? I guess we can, after we finish the recording, we can stay if we want to, or people can stay if they want to and continue.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the very impressive and informative presentation. I learned a lot too, and hope everyone else. And thank you everyone for coming here and participate in this discussion. And looking forward to see you in the future meetings. And have a great evening. Thanks.
Thanks, you. I'm going to stop recording now.